The ancient Ram Inn in Watton-under-Edge, Gloucestershire, has held a sinister reputation for centuries. Built in the 12th century on land rumoured to have been once a pagan burial ground, the inn has survived countless chapters of English history. It was a meeting point for medieval pilgrims, an outpost for travelling clergymen, and, according to local legend, a site of secret rituals and sacrificial offerings. The place is more than just haunted, many believe it's cursed. In 1989, a young history professor named Claire Dalton from Bristol University became fascinated with the inn's strange history. She'd heard unsettling tales of hauntings, poltergeist activity, and ghostly apparitions, all steeped in local folklore and first hand accounts. Despite her rational skepticism, Claire was intrigued. She arranged to stay there for one night, determined to experience the inn for herself and document any findings for a paper on the folklore of haunted British inns. She arrived on a cold evening in late November with frost creeping over the ancient stones of the building. The owner, John Humphreys, a man who looked as worn as the inn itself, greeted her with a handshake and a stern warning. "People don't stay here overnight," he told her, his voice low and tired. "Not those who know better, anyway." But Claire brushed it off, eager to explore the inn's history with her own eyes. The inn was dimly lit, with flickering candles casting shadows along the exposed beams of the ceiling. The floors creaked beneath her feet, and the walls seemed to close in, as if the very architecture carried the weight of centuries. John led her through the maze of rooms, pointing out various hot spots of ghostly activity. "This is the bishop's room," he said gravely, gesturing to a small, cramped chamber with a rotting four-poster bed in the corner. "It's where I've seen the most, let's call them, disturbances." He told her about the ghosts people claimed to have seen here: a tall, shadowy figure, thought to be a monk, a young girl named Rosie who, according to legend, had been murdered on the property, and the spirits of sacrificial children buried beneath the floors. He then warned her about the incubus, a dark presence said to harass women specifically, and he advised her to be cautious. Unnerved but determined, Claire set up her recorder and camera in the bishop's room, feeling an eerie prickling sensation as John's words settled in. Despite the history, she reminded herself that she was here to study and document, not to be frightened by old stories. As night fell, the inn grew colder, and a strange silence filled the rooms. Around midnight, as Claire sat reviewing her notes, she heard footsteps on the stairs. She froze, listening as the footsteps grew louder, heading directly to the bishop's room. Her pulse quickened. She was certain she was alone in the inn. John had said that he was staying elsewhere for the night. She waited, heart pounding, as the footsteps stopped just outside her door. Then silence. After several minutes, she gathered the courage to open the door, only to find a narrow, empty hallway stretching before her, dark and still. Brushing it off as an old building settling, she returned to her notes, though now she couldn't shake a deep sense of unease. Suddenly, the temperature dropped sharply, and her breath misted in front of her. The silence was punctuated by a soft, childlike giggle from the corner of the room. She spun around and, for a brief, horrifying moment, she thought she saw the faint outline of a little girl standing by the bed, her face pale and expressionless. Claire blinked and the figure was gone. Nervously, she started to pack up her equipment, her rational mind faltering under the heavy, unnatural chill. But just as she reached for her camera, she felt a pressure on her shoulders, like two cold, invisible hands pressing down, pinning her in place. The weight grew heavier, and she found herself unable to move. A low whisper filled her ears, chilling her to the bone. "Get out," the voice hissed, faint and inhuman. Finally, the pressure lifted and she stumbled backward, her breathing ragged. She looked around the room in disbelief, trying to steady herself, but the shadows seemed to shift and swirl darker than before. She was desperate to leave, but as she turned to the door, a deafening bang echoed through the inn. The air was thick, charged with a sense of hostility. Suddenly, A woman's voice rang out, wailing, filled with pain and sorrow. Claire's instinct was to run, but she found herself rooted to the spot, unable to look away as the air seemed to ripple before her, revealing or conjuring a faint figure dressed in a hooded, old-fashioned cloak. The woman was crying, a haunting sob that filled the small room. And just as suddenly as she appeared, she faded into the shadows, her sobs replaced by an oppressive silence. Terrified and shaken, Claire finally fled to the bishop's room, her heart pounding as she ran through the narrow corridors of the inn. She stumbled into the main hall where she found John, who had returned early to check on her. He looked at her pale, frightened face and nodded knowingly. "What did you see?" he asked quietly, though he already seemed to know the answer. She recounted her experiences, her voice barely a whisper, and he simply nodded. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last." Some say this land was cursed before the inn was even built. Pagan rituals, sacrifices. They say that the energy never left, that it pulls people in, traps them, and torments them. Claire left that night, shaken and forever changed. Though she continued her work in history, she never returned to the ancient Ram Inn. She refused to speak of her experience for years, but it was said that whenever anyone mentioned the inn, her expression would change, as though she was reliving every moment, every chilling whisper. Today, visitors to the ancient Ram Inn still report similar experiences. Some see shadowy figures, others hear ghostly voices, and a few even claim to feel that same icy pressure on their shoulders, as if they're being watched or warned. And for those who dare to stay in the bishop's room, it's said that the incubus still waits, a dark, lurking presence bound to the inn, guarding its secrets and refusing to let anyone forget the horrors of its past. To this day, the ancient Ram Inn remains one of England's most feared and notorious places, a testament to the lingering power of ancient rites and curses, with tales that continue to chill all who step foot in its haunted grounds.